It was a beautiful analogy of falling through the eyes into infinity. Or falling through thought into eternity. I'm going to ask this same question I asked before in a different way. The experience, not the concept, but the experience of emptiness without any object. The analogies we have for emptiness in language are like light, right? They're luminous, it's energy, it's whatever you call it, has a vibrational quality. And it is almost, I know it's impossible for the mind to conceive of anything that isn't vibrational, but is there any other way to experience other than I am? It's pure knowing, I am. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you get where I am here?
Yes, yes. The I am is the knowledge I am is the place where time and eternity intersect. To put it another way, it's the place in the mind where eternity shines. That's why I describe the I am sometimes as a doorway in the back of the mind. It's in the mind, but when you walk through that doorway, you disappear out of the mind. So in other words, it is the last outpost of the mind.
By the mind, you just mean the current thought?
I mean thought, yes. Thought or yes. So it's like a doorway, which is neither in the room, but you could never say it was outside the room. Is the doorway in the room or out of the room? It's neither. But it leads from the room outside the room. So the feeling I am, the reason I say it's in the back of the mind, is in relation to the objects that seem to be in the front of the mind. It's a concession to the object-facing mind. In relation to thought that knows objects, it's in the other direction, behind. And it's the last object in the back of the mind. When thought goes in the other direction from objects, when it turns around and goes back towards its source, it goes through that doorway, which is the knowledge I am.
Maybe we should call it a black hole instead of a doorway. Or it's really not an object.
We could call it a black hole, yes. It's where we go out of time into eternity. So eternity shines in time as the knowledge I am. So that's why I say it's where time and eternity intersect. It's where pure awareness and the mind intersect. In other words, it is the portal through which the mind goes. It turns upon itself. It goes back to its prime knowledge, the knowledge I am, which it knows before it knows anything else. Before anybody knows, I am hungry, I am tired, I am thinking, I am sad, we know I am. So we go, it's the first, the knowledge I am is the first step out of eternity into time when the separate self is developing, but it is the last step the separate self takes on its way back home. That's why Krishnamurti titled his book, The First and Last Freedom. It's the first act of the separate self as it comes into existence, the knowledge I am, and it's the last act of the separate self, the knowledge I am, as it returns to its source.
But it is a property, in a way, of the separate self, which means that the I am, being the last threshold, is still a form, yes, an object of source.
It's the subtlest object.
The subtlest object.
And it's an empty object through which thought passes. It's the last post through which thought passes before thought vanishes into its source. before time disappears into eternity.
So it seems like this whole vibrating thing is only happening in the world of objects. And that...
No, it's not happening in the world of objects. The
is
world of objects is
it.
awareness vibrating.
Right. That is the origin of the 10,000 things.
Yes, yes. In order for there to be 10,000 things, awareness has to vibrate within itself, appear first of all as sensing and perceiving. There's no ignorance in sensing and perceiving. Sensing and perceiving is still intimate, still close, still made of itself. It's only when it vibrates in the form of thinking that as thought, which is made of infinite awareness, but it appears as a thought. Now, in order for thought to stand, thought has to know an object. Try now to have a thought that is not a thought of something. It's not possible. Therefore, in order to arise as thought, the thought has to know an object. And in order to know an object, it must believe itself to be a subject. Now, how is awareness, infinite awareness, going to imagine that it is a finite subject? By choosing this object here, I'll identify myself with this, the body, and thereby become a finite subject. At that moment, the apparently finite subject made out of mind can know an apparently finite object made out of matter. So at that moment, the division, duality seems, the intimacy, the pure, seamless intimacy of experience seems to be divided in two, a subject and an object. And then this mind-made self can further subdivide the object into 10,000 things. But all those 10,000 things are a reflection of its own belief that it is a separate subject.
So perched on that threshold, facing not forward towards objects, but reverse towards the black hole, there is no experience to be had at that point. You jump, or it's a jump. It's an unhinge of some sort that doesn't. It cannot be. It can be pointed at, but it can't be described in any way whatsoever.
Yes, yes. Even to call it empty or transparent is not quite right, because the word empty only derives its meaning in contrast to the fullness of objects. But in this place of emptiness, there are no objects with which to compare it. So it is, we could say, it is beyond even emptiness. It is the absence of the absence. But there we simply cannot go there with thought. Hence, as a concession to language, we do the best we can and we say it is silent, it is void, it is empty, it is transparent.
So, final part of the question is these quote states like death, deep sleep, and various other types of samadhi type embodied states are really just approximations, or are they the real deal?
In order to, you see, all these ideas, death and in order to believe that they are real, we first have to have gone into this abstraction. We first have to have abstracted a separate object called a body that has its own mind within it, and that mind, its own consciousness within it. And then we look at the body and we see, oh, that body dies, therefore its mind must die, therefore its consciousness must disappear. But all of that is a complete abstraction. I mean, and the same thing with deep sleep, exactly. If we stay with our actual experience, time and space and death and sleep and changing states and all these things, they don't apply there. They only apply once we have overlooked our true nature. How do we how does awareness overlook its true nature? By rising as thought, by turning its back on itself and seeming to know an object by becoming a subject. Then, from the point of view of this subject, there are three states. This subject then goes through three states of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. This subject seems to come into existence when the body is born. It seems to grow old. It seems to grow sick. It seems to die. But all these beliefs refer to this subject, which, when explored, is found to be non-existent. Or rather, when I say is found to be non-existent, when this subject turns its attention upon itself, and in order to find out what am I really, it doesn't find itself to be non-existent. It finds itself to be this infinite awareness. In other words, this process of turning around upon itself. In this process of turning around upon itself, it is gradually, in most cases, divested of all the beliefs and feelings that thought has superimposed upon it, and it stands revealed as it was, as it is, in fact, always, infinite, eternal awareness.
So one of the ways to get to that threshold, other than extreme physical, like death or extreme physical misery or whatever, is the self-inquiry.
Yes.
That's
the
I am.
It's
That's
the shortcut. It's the direct path. This is what Ramana Maharshi and Krishna Menon said. This is the royal road. It's the fastest way. It's the direct way. It doesn't go through thinking or feeling or it's direct.
So when I spent 3 weeks at a Buddhist retreat looking at thought and realizing no thought was ever in the present, it was always in the future or the past. It was impossible to have a thought that you say without an object in space or in time. It's not possible. Okay. And then the answer to that was, okay, now what? That to me, it was an inquiry, but I just feel like I'm just keep getting up to that threshold, getting up to that threshold, getting up to that threshold. And
because in that question, it's a relative question, so you get a relative answer. You ask a question about something that is relative, what is thought? The meditation you did, the inquiry you did is very good, but you got a relative answer, and as you rightly say, it's partially satisfying. It's not profoundly satisfying. If we want a profoundly satisfying answer, we have to ask a question about reality. We have to ask a question about what is absolutely true.
Not about an object.
Not a relative question. If we ask a relative question about an object, we'll get a relative answer. We have to be interested in the absolute reality of experience. And if we ask a question about that, we compel the absolute reality to appear in our experience. Reality is so obliging. All we have to do is turn towards it.